Let me be the first man you trust with your heart completely. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a truth she couldn't turn away from. I've spent my life conquering and acquiring, but you're teaching me how to cherish. And in that moment, amid the echoes of a restored building and the crumbling of old fears, she finally let the walls fall. What if the most beautiful thing we ever build isn't a structure, but a life rebuilt from truth, vulnerability, and a love brave enough to begin again? Welcome to Shining Stories, where every tale is a doorway to something deeper. In this story, we follow Evelyn Carter, a fiercely independent architect, and Julian Hale, the enigmatic billionaire who challenges everything she thought she knew about love, legacy, and herself. A forgotten factory, a buried family secret, and a passion that could either save them or undo them. If this glimpse moved, you imagine what the full journey will do. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and let's begin this story together. There are women who live behind silence, not because no one spoke to them, but because somewhere along the way they taught themselves to stop listening. Evelyn Carter was one of them. At the age of 40, she had never been kissed, not truly, not the kind of kiss that undoes the armor, the kind that asks for nothing but presence. She had built her life on solitude, on discipline, restraint, and the quiet belief that love was a wound disguised as a wish. And then he arrived. Not with grand gestures or declarations, but with a single sentence that would become the crack in the wall she thought would never break. Let me be the first, in everything. The ballroom glowed with warm gold and whispers. It was an old building, Wexford Hall, elegant in the way time forgets to be. Outside, the skyline of Camden Hill shimmered with city light. Inside, people floated like ornaments in motion, polished, rehearsed, careful. Evelyn stood at the edge, unnoticed by design. She was not here to dazzle or network. She was here because Ivy, her loyal assistant, had insisted, "They can't hire what they can't see." Ivy said, laying a deep bronze dress across her bed that morning. "Skyline Haven isn't just a project, Evelyn. It's your legacy. Show up for it." And so she came with her hair pinned back, with heels that hurt, and with the faint ache of knowing she no longer belonged in rooms like this. She had built her small firm, Carter Atelier, with nothing but sketch paper and stubbornness. For over 2 decades, she restored what others would abandon: orphaned schools, crumbling churches, lost places, made whole again. But Skyline Haven, the newest development in the heart of the city, was something different. Big money, high stakes, the kind of project whispered about in elevators and closed-door dinners, and she knew brilliance alone wouldn't be enough. "You're the only one here not pretending to enjoy this," a voice said softly beside her. She turned. He was tall, composed, his suit a shade of slate that seemed to absorb the room's brightness. He didn't smile right away, but his presence, calm, grounded, felt like something real in a sea of performance. "You don't look like someone who needs attention," Evelyn replied. Not quite deflecting, not quite engaging. "I don't," he said, "but I notice people who avoid it." Then he added more gently, "Especially when they're the ones worth watching." She knew who he was. Everyone did. Julian Hale, real estate magnate, quiet philanthropist, and the man behind the city's most ambitious urban projects. He had power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, and eyes that seemed to listen even when his mouth didn't move. "I've followed your work," he said. "Your design for the Harbor Circle Community Center, you gave dignity to a place everyone else gave up on." Evelyn looked away, unaccustomed to recognition that felt honest. He wasn't flattering her, he was seeing her, and that was far more dangerous. Julian stepped a little closer, but not enough to touch. "I believe in excellence," he said, his voice lower now. "And when I find it, I don't let it pass quietly." Evelyn swallowed the heat rising in her throat. She had been admired before. She had been praised, but never quite like this. Never by someone who wasn't trying to own the light in her. He didn't linger. He disappeared into the crowd as seamlessly as he'd arrived, leaving her with nothing but the echo of his words and the strange, impossible sensation that maybe, not certainly, but maybe someone had just seen her through the very walls she'd spent a lifetime building. That night, alone in her quiet apartment above the old bookstore, Evelyn stood by the window and watched the city breathe, and for the first time in many years, she felt something stir beneath the stillness, not longing, not yet, but the question that always comes before it. What if this time was different? All across the ballroom, women noticed him, not just for the way he looked, but for the way power seemed to move with him, silent and sure like a current just beneath the surface. Julian Hale walked as if the world would rearrange itself to make space for him, and often it did. "You're very direct," Evelyn said, her voice composed but steady. "Julian," he corrected gently. "And yes, directness is efficient, and efficiency saves the one thing none of us can earn back." He glanced at the watch strapped to his wrist, a sleek timepiece more functional than ostentatious. "Time, is that what this is?" "Then," she asked, tilting her head. "A lesson in efficiency." He smiled, and for a fleeting second it softened something in him. "Actually, no, I wanted to talk about your proposal for the Haven District redevelopment." Evelyn's heart paused. "That submission wasn't due for another fortnight. I've already seen what you're working on," he said. "Your early sketches are remarkable, imaginative, grounded, human, but not what the committee wants." His gaze held hers, calm but unyielding. "I'm offering you something better." That quiet statement rang louder in her ears than any applause. Her body stiffened. Warning bells weren't new to her. She had spent decades walking carefully through a field of compromises she refused to make. Men like Julian Hale often saw the world as something owed to them, and Evelyn Carter had never owed herself to anyone. "I'm quite comfortable with my chances," she replied, her voice cool and clear. "Are you, though?" he asked, not unkindly. "You're a woman competing with firms that have existed for over a century, backed by teams 6 deep. You're brilliant, Evelyn, but the game wasn't made for you. It never was." He reached into his jacket, drawing out a slender card case. From it, he offered a single matte black card. "I'm building something in New Harbor. It's different. I need someone who can see what doesn't yet exist. Someone who sees with their heart as much as their mind." Evelyn didn't reach for the card. "You have a reputation, Mr. Hale. Everyone in power does," he said quietly. "Some deserve it, others don't. I don't ask people to believe stories, I ask them to witness. Then witness me." She challenged, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Judge for yourself." He took a single step closer, not threatening, but deliberate. "Dinner. Tomorrow night. Let me show you the vision. No commitments, just a conversation. And if you don't see something worth exploring, I will personally recommend your firm for the Haven project. No strings, no conditions." She studied him. Not just his offer, but the man beneath it. Her instincts forged in childhood through loss and observation told her to run. She had grown up watching love destroy a woman who deserved better. Her mother abandoned and exhausted, left to piece together both finances and dignity after a man walked away. Evelyn had learned to protect her dreams by never tying them to someone else's promises. "Just a business dinner," she clarified. "For now," he said. And in that moment there was no seduction in his voice, just something simple, honest. Like two people standing at the edge of something they hadn't named yet. She took the card. The weight of it surprised her. "I'll think about it." 8 o'clock. The Meridian. He said it softly, as if he didn't want the world to overhear. Then he walked away, instantly consumed by conversations, by admirers, by obligation, but even from across the room, his eyes returned to her more than once quietly, as if drawn by a pull neither of them had yet acknowledged. She left soon after. The cool night air met her skin like truth. In the taxi, she leaned back, her thoughts in disarray. At home in her apartment tucked above the bookshop on Linden Avenue, Evelyn slipped off her heels, poured a modest glass of wine, and stood before her drafting table. The curves and lines of her work usually brought her peace, but tonight nothing felt still. His voice lingered, his offer echoed, and beneath all of it, a question she didn't want to ask aloud. What am I afraid of? The game was never fair. It never pretended to be. As Evelyn sat curled up on her living room couch, the echo of Julian's voice lingered. The game is rigged. It always has been. She didn't need convincing. She had lived the truth of it. Doors closed, not because of lack of brilliance, but because of lack of belonging. Because she didn't play by the rules others had written. The Skyline Haven project had been her chance to break through. But what Julian offered wasn't a doorway. It was a side entrance, one no one else had shown her. She opened her laptop and typed his name into the search bar. Slowly, cautiously. As if by searching him, she might somehow summon something she wasn't yet ready for. The results appeared instantly. Articles in financial magazines, interviews that painted him as a visionary. Profiles that blurred the line between awe and suspicion. Photos of him at galas and summits, often beside stunning women who never seemed to appear twice. A man who was used to getting what he wanted. And then moving on, her phone buzzed, a message from Ivy. So did you charm the room like a good little architect? Evelyn hesitated before replying. Met Julian Hale. He wants to talk about a new harbor project tomorrow night. Ivy's response was immediate. The Julian Hale. Evelyn. That's huge. Just be careful. Remember. Christopher. Evelyn winced at the memory. Christopher had been a client. Charming, persistent, flattering. He had pursued her until she finally gave in, only for him to vanish the moment she delivered his lake house design. It wasn't the emotional betrayal that lingered, it was the professional humiliation, the feeling of being used, then erased. She closed the laptop and rose to her feet. Crossing the room, she stopped in front of the tall windows that framed the city like a painting. Camden Hill stretched out below a pattern of lights and quiet movement. She had built her life in this city with steadiness and restraint, by working twice as hard, speaking half as much, and never letting anyone too close. Julian Hale represented everything she avoided. Intensity, unpredictability, risk that didn't come with a safety net. And yet. As she pressed her hand to the cool glass, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar ripple inside her. Curiosity. Not just about the project, but about him. About the way he saw her. Tomorrow night she would meet him on her terms, professional, grounded, guarded. The walls around her heart had kept her safe for so many years. No man, not even one like Julian, would take those walls down. Still, as she turned away from the window, she couldn't silence the small voice that whispered, "What if he already sees through them?" She didn't know. Couldn't know that accepting his card had shifted something irreversible. A quiet chain of events had already begun, and they would soon pull her into a world far more complex than contracts and floor plans. Julian Hale would indeed be the first. In many ways, the first to challenge what she believed about herself. The first to uncover the truths she kept buried. And perhaps, just perhaps, the first to make her wonder if the comfort of distance was worth the loneliness it demanded. In the stillness of her apartment, she placed the card on her nightstand, its black surface catching the dim light like a sealed promise, and across the city, in a glass tower that touched the clouds, Julian stood at his own window, watching the same night, holding a smile that carried more secrets than she could yet imagine. Secrets that would wrap them both in a story neither of them was ready for. The next evening arrived draped in anticipation. The restaurant inside the Meridian Hotel whispered old-world elegant chandeliers like frozen stars, linen so crisp they barely moved with breath, and voices softened by the hush of wealth. Evelyn stepped inside at precisely 8, dressed in a black gown that spoke the language of quiet authority. She had spent the entire day buried in blueprints and schedules, deliberately refusing to let Julian Hale distract her focus. This was a meeting, a client conversation, a transaction. She told herself this. But when she saw him rise to greet her, Something inside her didn't quite believe it. Julian Hale was not just another name on a proposal, and he certainly wasn't just another client. As Evelyn entered the candlelit dining room at the Meridian, heads barely turned except his. He rose when he saw her, and even among the quiet power players of Camden Hill, his presence carried a stillness that commanded attention. He wore a charcoal suit tonight, elegant, understated, but cut in a way that made you notice the lines of strength beneath the fabric. His eyes, those unsettlingly clear, observant eyes, brightened when they met hers. "You came," he said simply, pulling out her chair like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Professional curiosity," she replied, settling into her seat with practiced ease. "New Harbor's a dream for any architect. A clean canvas. Is that all that brought you here?" His question hovered in the air, not sharp, but laced with something unspoken. She met his gaze without flinching. Should there have been another reason? "Mr. Hale, Julian," he corrected again with a slight nod toward the server. "And I think there is. It's the same reason I looked for you last night. Recognition of what kindred spirits." He raised his glass, not in a toast but as if making an offering. "To those who build walls the world doesn't see." The line unsettled her. She picked up her glass, sipped quietly, allowing the wine to dull her discomfort rather than sharpen her response. A few minutes later, the server returned with appetizers. She didn't recall ordering tiny, delicate creations that looked more like art than food. She used them as a cue to shift the conversation. "Tell me about New Harbor." Julian's mouth curved slightly, acknowledging the deflection without resistance. From beside him, he retrieved a leather portfolio and slid several large photographs across the table. She leaned in. The images captured her attention immediately. A decaying industrial site by the river. Massive brick buildings, cathedral-like ceilings, shattered windows that somehow still held the dignity of their age. It was haunting. "Beautiful Sad Hale Foundry," he said softly, "a textile complex from the early 1920s, long abandoned. The city has tried to revive it for decades, but preservation regulations and structural decay have made every attempt collapse." Evelyn felt it immediately, the quiet thrill of possibility. The challenge was immense, and she loved nothing more than a place everyone else had given up on. That's why traditional developers walk away. Julian continued, his tone intensifying. "They don't know how to listen to the bones of a building, but I don't want to erase its past. I want to translate it into something that serves the present without silencing the history." His words were rich with vision, not marketing, not strategy, but the kind of purpose Evelyn had spent her life chasing. A full community, residences, artist studios, gathering spaces, learning centers inside the original walls. As he spoke, he became someone else entirely. Not the billionaire with the cool gaze and polished name, but a man who had once maybe stood in front of a structure and fallen in love with the way light touched brick. "You've clearly done your research," she said, trying not to sound impressed. "But she was. I studied architecture before I was pulled into the business world," he admitted. "It never left me." Their entrees arrived then, and the conversation drifted organically, unexpectedly, into something more human. She found herself speaking about her mother, a woman who had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table after Evelyn's father disappeared. She talked about her scholarship, her time at a northern university where she was often the only woman in the room, and the quiet wars she fought every day to be taken seriously in a world built for men. Julian listened in a way few men ever had, not waiting to respond. Just listening, like he was storing each sentence as something valuable. Then he spoke of his own past, of taking the ruins of his father's failed business and rebuilding them not out of ambition, but necessity. "My father taught me one thing through his downfall," Julian said quietly, his expression hardening at the memory. "Never trust blindly, and always verify what people hide behind their promises." Evelyn nodded, the silence between them, heavy, not awkward. There was pain behind his eyes, the kind that shaped you, The kind she recognized because she carried some of it too. Trust no one, completely verify everything. His words landed with a weight that lingered. Sounds lonely. Evelyn murmured before she could stop herself. Julian's gaze met hers. Calm open. It can be, he admitted. But it's what's kept me breathing in a world where people celebrate your failure before they mourn your loss. For a brief second, something softened in his face. Something human. Something fragile. Then he asked in a voice far too quiet to be casual, "You understand why isolation becomes armor, don't you?" The question was a key, and it found its way into a lock she had long forgotten. She looked away. "Let's talk terms," she said instead, grateful for the shift in focus. Julian nodded, offering no resistance. He outlined the proposal with calm precision, full creative control, a generous timeline, an unprecedented budget. There would be no rush, no corporate meddling, only vision, trust, and the canvas of something forgotten, waiting to be reborn. It was by all professional standards, the chance of a lifetime. But Evelyn had learned the hard way that sometimes the most glittering offers came wrapped in silence and sacrifice. Why me? She didn't mean to sound small when she asked it, but the question had lived in her since their first meeting. There are dozens of architects who would jump at this. She added, more visible. More accepted, Julian leaned in slightly, not to intimidate, but to make the moment feel more private. Because you see the world as I do, not just as it is, but as it could be. He held her gaze a second longer before continuing. Your work doesn't just fill space, Evelyn, it transforms it. And like me, you've never chosen the expected path. You build in silence because silence is where truth starts. Dinner ended, but neither of them wanted the evening to. So when he suggested a walk, she nodded, almost surprised by her own yes. The night air was soft spring, stirring the edges of the breeze. To their right, the park exhaled darkness. To their left, the city glimmered tall and untouchable. Have you made up your mind? Julian asked, about New Harbor. She glanced at the sky where only the faintest stars could be seen behind the city's noise. It's an extraordinary offer. But I've also learned to be careful with things that look too perfect from a distance. She stopped, then turning to face him. Your reputation walks into the room before you do. Julian. People say you always get what you want, no matter who gets hurt in the process. He didn't argue, he didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer. Some reputations are earned. Others are crafted by people who resent what they cannot build. His voice lowered. You know that feeling, don't you? How many times have your designs been credited to someone else? How many times have they called it luck instead of skill? The truth of it burned. She had fought those battles. Quietly. Blueprints altered without her name, ideas repeated by men who took the applause rooms where she was mistaken for the assistant instead of the architect. What do you really want from me, Julian? Beyond blueprints and contracts? Her voice was low, steady. The question had claws, but it also carried something more tender underneath. Julian didn't hesitate. The truth. He said simply, I want to know you. Not the polished facade you present to the world. The real woman beneath the symmetry. The one who builds beautiful spaces. Because life hasn't always given her one to live in. He moved a little closer. From the first moment I saw your work, I saw a reflection of myself. We both craft order from chaos. We both carry scars we've turned into structure. And I think that scares you. His hand rose, not quite touching her, just hovering in the space between them. The way someone might reach for a flame they're afraid will burn them. There's something between us, Evelyn. You feel it too. She stepped back. Anger flickered sharp, immediate, protective. You don't know me, Mr. Hale. You're wrong, she wanted to say. But Evelyn said nothing. Because a part of her she didn't want to name knew Julian was right. I know enough. He said, his voice steady despite her retreat. You built your life around structure, around control. because you watched your mother lose everything when your father walked away. I know you've kept your distance from love because vulnerability terrifies you more than failure ever could. Her chest tightened. She hadn't told him that. Not in words. Not about the days her mother came home too tired to cry. Not about the silence her father left behind, or how she learned to survive by needing no one. How could he possibly know? Who told you this? She demanded, her tone sharper, now suspicion, replacing the quiet pull of connection. No one, he answered simply. I recognize it, because I've lived it. Different details. Same scars. Evelyn turned away, something inside her fracturing. This conversation is over. She stepped back, the cool night brushing her skin like a warning, but before she could walk away, Julian reached out his hand, closing gently around her wrist. His touch was warm, not possessive, just present. I made you uncomfortable, he said softly. I'm sorry. And something in his voice, real unguarded, made her hesitate. Take the weekend. Think about the project. What I'm offering is everything you've worked for. Whatever else is between us. That's yours to choose. He released her, then stepping back as if to show he meant it. A sleek black car had already pulled up beside the curb, appearing as if summoned by his will alone. Before she could protest, Julian opened the door. The proposal's inside, he said, offering her a leather-bound portfolio. And my personal number. Call me day or night when you're ready to talk about New Harbor. Or anything else. Evelyn accepted it. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but it landed like a spark. Small, impossible to ignore. I'll be in touch about the project, she said, her voice cool but uneven. He leaned in slightly, his eyes no longer unreadable. Be careful who you share this with. His tone was quiet, but it carried the weight of something more than confidentiality, something like warning. Not everyone is pleased with my interest in Hale Foundry. Before she could ask what that meant, he closed the door. The car eased forward, and just like that, he was a figure in the dark again, still powerful and achingly alone. In the back seat, Evelyn stared straight ahead, her fingers tightening around the portfolio. Julian Hale had unsettled her, not with flirtation or flattery, but with the way he seemed to see through the walls she had spent decades fortifying. He was, she realized, a risk, not to her career, to her composure. As the car turned onto her street, she opened the portfolio, not out of urgency, but instinct. A thin newspaper clipping slid out. It was an old article about Hale Foundry. In the margin, someone had written in sharp pen strokes, Wheeler's making another move. Watch your back. She stared at the message, Wheeler. The name meant nothing to her, yet the warning pulsed with something deeper than rivalry. It felt personal, shadowed. As the driver opened her door, Evelyn made a quiet decision. She would learn everything there was to know about this place, about the man offering it, and about whoever Wheeler was before she set anything in motion. Because Julian Hale may have offered her a career-defining project, but he'd also handed her a mystery, and Evelyn Carter had learned long ago, you don't step into foundations you haven't tested. The signs were there. Complications. Questions she couldn't ignore no matter how captivating the offer seemed. Evelyn stepped into her apartment, the city's hush trailing behind her. She placed the portfolio gently on the coffee table, slipped off her heels, and exhaled. The quiet was welcome, until it wasn't. A glass of wine in hand, she opened her laptop. Her fingers hesitated for just a second before typing, Hale Foundry, New Harbor, Wheeler. The search results arrived in a rush, articles brimming with tension, lawsuits, community protests, and one name that kept repeating, Hamilton Wheeler, CEO of Wheeler Capital One. Headline caught her breath like a hook. Wheeler accuses Hale Industries of backdoor tactics to sabotage historic redevelopment bid. The piece detailed zoning manipulation, city board controversies, and whispered alliances. Evelyn scrolled, uncovering a web of hostility between the two men, not just corporate rivals but something more visceral, A feud that had turned personal. Her phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. Just 5 words. "Did you make it home safely?" She didn't need to guess Julian. Her stomach tensed. "How did he get my number?" Still she replied, "Yes. Researching Hale Foundry now. You didn't mention Hamilton Wheeler." The response came instantly. "He's the reason we have to be careful. He doesn't fight clean. We'll talk when you're ready." Evelyn stared at her screen, unease settling over her like a weight. This wasn't just a design commission. It was a story already in motion, one with shadows, past wounds, and intentions that might not be as transparent as the glass renderings she had reviewed. She looked at the portfolio again. Inside were breathtaking sketches, sustainability blueprints, community feedback plans. It was everything she had ever dreamed of working on. But dreams, she had learned, sometimes came tied to a cost. Why her? Why, out of all the architects in the country, had Julian Hale chosen her? He'd spoken of kindred spirits of shared vision, and maybe there was truth in that. But Evelyn had learned to trust her intuition, and her intuition whispered, "There's something he hasn't told you." She set down her empty wine glass, the room thick with decision. She would take the project, but on her terms, with eyes wide open. With the same guarded precision she had always used to protect herself, this would be no different. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that Julian Hale had already set something in motion. Something that would make professional distance not only difficult, but impossible. Their lives were no longer parallel. They were intertwined, now woven into a fabric of secrets, neither of them fully understood. Secrets that would threaten everything they had built alone and together. 6 weeks later, Evelyn stood in the great hall of Hale Foundry. Sunlight poured through cathedral windows, catching in the dust that floated like flecks of gold. The scent of rust and age still lingered, but so did possibility. She had been commuting between Camden Hill and New Harbor for over a month. What had begun as cautious interest had shifted into something deeper, a quiet, burning creative fire. She ran her fingers lightly across one of the original support beams, marveling at the integrity of its century-old craftsmanship. "You see it, don't you?" His voice came from behind her, softer than usual, not commanding, just present. She turned. Julian stood at the entrance, dressed in dark jeans and a worn gray Henley. He looked real, less like a tycoon, and more like someone who had once picked up a pencil and believed a building could heal a city. "I knew you'd understand it," he said, and though she didn't answer aloud, something in her silence told him that she did. Away from the relentless rhythm of Camden Hill. Julian Hale felt like a different man, less sharp, less armored, more real. Evelyn stood in the heart of the old foundry's west wing, staring up at the skeletal rafters that reached into the silence like the ribs of some forgotten creature. "It's speaking to me," she murmured. "This ceiling. It feels like the spine of something ancient, sleeping but still alive, as if it's waiting to be remembered." Julian smiled, rare, quiet, unguarded. "That's exactly how I felt the first time I stepped inside." He moved beside her, not touching, but close enough to stir the air between them. "The designs you sent yesterday, they're remarkable, Evelyn. You've honored the soul of this place while breathing something entirely new into it." His words warmed her more than she cared to admit. For weeks they had worked side by side, long hours, tough decisions, creative breakthroughs, and always beneath the professional ease, an unspoken tension hummed softly like an echo between walls. Julian had never crossed a boundary, but the space between them was no longer empty, the east wings proving difficult. She said, guiding them back into safer territory. "The foundation damage is worse than we expected. Show me." He followed without question. They bent over drawings and schematics for the next hour, their heads nearly touching above a makeshift table littered with pencil shavings and red-lined notes. Here, Evelyn felt untouchable. in the clarity of numbers and angles, in the clean language of structure. Here, nothing confused her. We should celebrate, Julian said once they finished adjusting the plans. Tonight, dinner at Alara. I've reserved the private room. She hesitated. I should go back to the hotel. I still need to finalize the HVAC integration layout, Evelyn. His voice lost its usual precision. It softened like it was meant only for her. You've been working 16-hour days for nearly a month. One evening won't ruin anything. And he was right. She had thrown herself into this project with a single-mindedness that left little space for breath, partly out of ambition, partly to avoid what was growing between them. All right, she said at last. But I need to stop by the hotel first. Of course, Julian checked his watch. My driver can take you. I'll meet you at the restaurant at 8. That evening, the city had begun to taste like summer. Warm air, gentle wind, a sky slowly folding into blue-gray dusk. Evelyn stepped out of the car in front of Alara New Harbor's most celebrated dining space. She wore a deep sapphire dress, something new, something softer than her usual wardrobe. She had always dressed for purpose. But something about Julian made her want to meet him, not just as an architect, but as a woman. Inside, he stood as she approached. He was already waiting in the candlelit room, a quiet oasis tucked behind the main dining floor. You look beautiful, he said, simply, his eyes lingering without apology. Thank you. She accepted it more easily than she expected. No deflection, no discomfort. They sat, champagne was poured, and what followed was not just a meal. It was an unfolding. Course after course arrived, like small stories, delicate, surprising, curated for the moment. Wine flowed gently, and so did the conversation. Architecture, yes, but also poetry, music, loss. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd felt like this. Not watched, but seen. Not performing, but present. As dessert arrived, Julian reached beneath the table and placed a small box beside her plate. I have something for you, he said. Julian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and retrieved a small velvet box. Evelyn stiffened slightly, not out of fear but from the sudden shift in mood. Julian, she began cautiously. He offered a brief, amused smile. It's not what you think, he said, his voice low. I'm not proposing anything, except perhaps a deeper kind of trust. He opened the box. Inside was an antique key strung on a simple silver chain. It was beautiful in a quiet, utilitarian way. Its worn edges and ornate bow whispered of stories long past. It's one of the original master keys to the foundry. He explained, I found it tucked in a file of old city permits. It felt right that the person breathing new life into this place should carry a piece of its past. Evelyn's fingers closed around it instinctively. The weight surprised her. This is perfect, she said softly. Thank you. Without asking. Julian stepped behind her. His fingers brushed her skin as he fastened the chain around her neck. They lingered just slightly, intentionally, or not. She wasn't sure. When he returned to his seat, his face had changed. Gone was the ease of dinner conversation. In its place was something heavier, more urgent. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Something I should have shared from the beginning. Evelyn sat straighter. What is it? Julian took a deep breath, the air seeming to stretch between them. Wheeler's interest in this property. It isn't just business. His great-grandfather once owned this land. My grandfather bought it in the early 50s, legally, cleanly, but Wheeler, he believes it was stolen. Was it? No. The transaction was legitimate, but he's built his version of the story, and now it's personal. Julian's eyes darkened not with anger but with a weariness Evelyn hadn't seen before. Our families have been circling each other for decades, long before either of us was born. You should have told me all this before I accepted the commission. Would it have changed your mind? No, but it would have changed the terms. I don't like being blindsided, especially by things that could jeopardize the work. You're right, I didn't want to burden you with old rivalries that should have died long ago. Is that all it is? Because the surveillance at the site says otherwise. She had noticed the guards, the cameras, the layers of security that seemed too much even for a project of this scale. Julian hesitated. Wheeler has interfered before sabotaged plans, threatened contractors. There was even a fire Boston, 2 years ago. He looked down for a beat, then back up. Wheeler believes winning justifies any means, and you don't. I believe in winning the right way. But I also know what happens when you pretend wolves don't bite. Evelyn watched him carefully. His face gave nothing away, but his voice. His voice was steadier than it should have been if he were truly at peace. Is there anything else I should know? For a moment, it looked like he might say something more, but then gently, he shook his head. Nothing that threatens this project, or you. I give you my word. The words were well chosen, measured, almost too carefully. Their evening ended with a silence. Neither of them knew how to name. Not anger. Not mistrust, but the kind of tension that comes when truth is only half told. On the ride back to her hotel, Evelyn turned the key around her fingers, its cool metal a reminder of all that had changed and all that hadn't yet been revealed. The project was no longer just about architecture. It was history, conflict, legacy, and Evelyn wasn't walking away. Not now. Even as the road ahead grew more uncertain, her heart had already begun to map the shape of what could be. At the door of her hotel suite, Julian stood with a stillness that suggested restraint, not distance, but respect. I have to fly back to Camden Hill first thing in the morning, he said, his voice lower than usual. Board meetings I can't avoid. Evelyn offered a half smile. I ran a firm long before you walked into my life. Julian, I think I can handle a few days of solo work. He smiled at that, and the tension between them just for a moment softened. Of course you can. That was never in question. But then his expression shifted again, serious, thoughtful. Just stay aware of your surroundings. Wheeler isn't subtle, and he rarely plays fair. He has eyes in places you wouldn't expect. You're starting to make me nervous. That's not what I want. He hesitated, then stepped closer. His hand rose slowly and touched the old key at her neck. It rested there, cold and heavy against her skin. I just want you safe, Evelyn. There was no performance in his voice, only concern, and something else, something she didn't have a name for. For weeks, they had moved carefully around their growing connection, defined boundaries, polite distances, but now, with only inches between them, those boundaries felt suddenly fragile. Before she could speak, his phone buzzed. He looked at it, and just like that, his body tensed and his mind was already elsewhere. I need to take this, he said quickly. Good night, Evelyn. We'll talk tomorrow. And then he was gone, already walking briskly toward the elevator, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp with urgency. Evelyn stood alone in the silence he left behind. Back inside her suite, she moved like someone's sleepwalking heels, abandoned hair untied. The quiet felt too loud. She sat down and opened her laptop. If she was being drawn into something larger, she needed to understand what it was. Search after search led her into the long shadow of a family rivalry that spanned generations, Hale versus Wheeler. A history stitched together with lawsuits, land grabs, bitter headlines, and backroom whispers. It hadn't always been clean. She found stories of questionable zoning battles, contested estates fires that had no clear cause, and accusations that never made it to court, but lingered in the corners of articles like smoke after a storm. The deeper she went, the more uneasy she felt. This project wasn't just about reclaiming an abandoned structure. It was about power, legacy, and old wounds that refused to close. Julian had shared pieces of the truth, but clearly there were parts he was still keeping to himself. Her phone chimed, landed safe in Camden Hill. Sorry for the rushed exit. Call me tomorrow if anything comes up. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she moved to the window, letting the lights of New Harbor blur softly in her eyes. She had grown to love this city in just a few weeks, its layered architecture, its resilience, its restless energy. She could feel herself rooting into its concrete, like ivy twining herself into its bones. The Hale Foundry project was everything she had ever wanted: ambitious, timeless, transformational. But at what cost? And could she trust Julian Hale with the truth of what that cost might be? A knock interrupted her thoughts. She crossed the room quietly, checking the peephole. A hotel staff member stood there, holding a sealed envelope. Delivery for Ms. Carter. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting it with a quick nod. She closed the door, turned the envelope over in her hands, and opened it. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of thick ivory stationery, smooth to the touch, its corners embossed in faint gold. The handwriting was elegant, confident. "Ms. Carter, I believe we have mutual interests regarding the Hale Foundry. There is information you should be aware of before proceeding further. Breakfast tomorrow, 9 o'clock, 16 Restaurant. No need to confirm, I'll be waiting. Hamilton Wheeler." Evelyn read it once, then again. Her initial reaction was disbelief, quick, sharp. Then something colder crept in, curiosity tinged with unease. How did he know where she was staying, and more importantly, what could he possibly know that she didn't? Common sense told her to ignore it. Julian certainly would have told her not to go. Wheeler was, after all, his adversary, the name whispered in every conversation about risk. And yet, Evelyn had never made decisions based solely on loyalty. As an architect, she knew one thing: you never design from only one angle. You study the whole structure, its history, its fractures before you begin to rebuild. She picked up her phone, arrived safely at the hotel. "We'll call tomorrow." She hit send. She said nothing about the invitation. That night, sleep hovered just out of reach. Her mind turned over questions like loose bricks in an old foundation. By morning, she had made up her mind. This wasn't betrayal, it was due diligence. She dressed with quiet intent, choosing a structured gray suit that conveyed precision and professionalism. After a pause, she added the key pendant Julian had given her, not as a symbol of allegiance, but as a reminder that she stood in the middle of something much larger than herself. She wasn't taking sides, she was gathering facts. At exactly 9 o'clock, Evelyn entered 16, the restaurant on the top floor of the tallest tower in New Harbor. The morning light spilled across the glass walls, casting long shadows on the river far below. She scanned the room. Near the window, a man in his early 60s rose from his seat. Silver hair, tailored navy suit, a bearing that spoke of old wealth and even older power. Though they'd never met, she recognized him immediately. Hamilton Wheeler, Ms. Carter. He greeted, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Wheeler." Her voice was polite, but measured. "I must admit your invitation was unexpected. Please sit. I've taken the liberty of ordering coffee." She eased into the seat across from him, her posture calm, her thoughts alert. "Your note mentioned information about the foundry. Information you believe I should have." Wheeler studied her not rudely, but intently. His eyes flicked briefly to the pendant at her throat before returning to her face. Direct. "I appreciate that." He sipped his coffee, then placed the cup down with precision. "How much has Julian told you about the history between our families?" "He mentioned a long-standing business rivalry," she replied carefully, "and your interest in the property." Wheeler chuckled, though the sound carried no warmth. A rivalry. How elegantly understated, his expression sharpened. "Miss Carter, you've aligned yourself with a man whose family built their fortune by dismantling mine." "I'm an architect, Mr. Wheeler," she replied, her tone steady. I don't take sides in battles that began long before I was born. I'm not a historian, Mr. Wheeler." Evelyn said calmly, "I'm here to restore a building, not pass judgment on old grudges." Wheeler leaned forward, voice low, gaze sharp. There is no neutrality here, Miss Carter. That building. It's not just brick and steel, it's the final chapter in a story my family has been trying to reclaim for over 70 years. He reached into his jacket and retrieved a folded page, aged but carefully preserved. He laid it gently between them on the white linen tablecloth. A letter from my grandfather, written in 1954. It details how Joseph Hale, Julian's grandfather, systematically collapsed our holdings, then acquired the foundry at a fraction of its worth. Evelyn didn't move to touch it. Her hands remained folded in her lap with all due respect. That was a lifetime ago. Wheeler's voice remained composed, but his eyes, they burned with the weight of something long buried. The tactics have evolved, but the game hasn't. Julian is his grandfather's heir in every way, polished on the outside but underneath. You'll find the same machinery, ruthless, calculated, inevitable. Do you have proof? Evelyn asked her, tone neutral but firm. Would I have asked you here if I didn't? He opened a sleek leather briefcase and removed another folder. 3 years ago, Hale Industries acquired a controlling stake in Meridian Systems, a tech firm that by coincidence owned patents critical to one of our largest developments. Evelyn listened. Within months, Meridian hiked licensing fees, but only for Wheeler Group. That project collapsed before it even broke ground. That's aggressive, she said, but not illegal. No, he agreed. But what about this? He slid another document toward her, a series of financial records, wire transfers, handwritten notes, payments traced from a Hale subsidiary to the office of a zoning commissioner in New Harbor, a commissioner who had blocked Wheeler's plans on grounds of technical deficiencies, then weeks later approved Julian's proposal, nearly identical in scope and detail. Evelyn frowned. She leaned forward, reading quickly, her trained eye catching the comparisons instantly. The similarities were undeniable. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve to know who you're working with. Wheeler's tone softened not in strategy, but in something almost resembling respect. You've built a name on integrity, on work. That means something. I don't think Julian's been honest with you. Not about this project, and not about how he's securing it. Evelyn kept her posture composed, but inside doubt pressed against her ribs like a slow rising tide. And what exactly are you suggesting that you walk away? I'm suggesting you ask the questions you've been too careful to voice. Why now? Why you? Why this project with this intensity? The questions struck deeper than she expected because they echoed her own. She had felt it even if she hadn't admitted it. Julian's interest in her, in the foundry, it carried a weight that design alone couldn't explain. And if I were to reconsider, would you be waiting with your own offer? Wheeler's mouth curved into a thin smile. I won't insult you by pretending this is purely about conscience. Yes. I would want someone like you to restore Hale Foundry under my company, under clearer terms. So I'm simply meant to trade one side for another. One legacy for yours. Evelyn's voice was calm, but her question struck straight through. The moment I'm not asking for allegiance. Miss Carter Wheeler said, his tone smooth but deliberate. I'm offering clarity. A chance to build something extraordinary without a shadow trailing behind every decision you make. Evelyn rose, gathering her bag with practiced composure. I appreciate your concern, but I make my own assessments. She paused. I'll consider what you've shared. Wheeler stood as well, drawing a sleek card from his pocket. When you're ready to talk again, and I believe you will be. Call me directly, day or night. The phrase stirred something in her. Julian had used the exact same words. She tucked the card into her coat pocket, the unease pressing deeper into her chest as she left the restaurant. Outside the Riverwalk was quiet. The air crisp with early light, the city still shaking off its morning stillness. In the distance, the silhouette of Hale Foundry loomed no longer just a building, now a monument layered with history, rivalry, and unanswered questions. Her phone buzzed, a message from Julian. Meeting, running late. We'll call this evening. How's the East Wing progressing? Evelyn stared at the screen. Everything she once held as certain. The project, Julian. Her own instincts, now lived in shadow. She had always built her career on clarity of purpose, of design, of vision, but now all of it blurred, and she couldn't shake the growing suspicion that she was not the architect in this story, but a well-placed piece on someone else's board. She pocketed her phone without replying. She needed space, to think, to breathe. Instead of returning to her hotel, she went straight to the foundry. Inside, its quiet immensity surrounded by concrete and rusted beams, she spread out her blueprints like armor. Here at least the structure made sense. The flaws could be measured, the solutions designed. There were no politics in beams and tension loads, but Wheeler's questions refused to leave her. Why her? Why now? What wasn't? Julian sang. As the afternoon wore on and sunlight filtered amber through the massive windows, Evelyn reached a decision: she would stay. She would complete the project, but no longer in the shadow of trust, untested. Julian Hale had promised to be the first to challenge her, the first to see her, the first to earn her trust. Now, he would be the first to face her demand. For the truth, all of it, with no more filters, no more charm, no more half-light, whatever the cost. To the project, to the bond growing quietly between them, or to the wall she'd built so carefully around her heart. What she couldn't yet know was that the truth she would soon uncover would reach far deeper than Julian's rivalry with Wheeler. It would reach her past, her family, her deepest fault lines, and when it did, it would crack the life she'd constructed with precision, one piece at a time. Far away, the Manhattan skyline shimmered against the dark. Inside the glass tower of Hale Industries, light pooled across a long table. On it sat an architectural model of the foundry, meticulous, beautiful, exact, and across from it Evelyn stood, back to the door, hands folded, the building she had designed rendered in miniature, her vision, her work, and now, her reckoning. They captured it perfectly, Julian said quietly, behind her. Every line, every shadow. They finished it yesterday. I wanted it to be a surprise. Evelyn didn't turn right away. She had arrived in Camden Hill only hours earlier, her mind still echoing with everything she had uncovered in the days since meeting Hamilton Wheeler. 3 days of digging. 3 nights of questioning everything. And now, standing before the miniature replica of Hale Foundry, she found herself searching for strength in the contours of her own design. "It's beautiful," she said at last, turning to face him. They honored every detail. Julian approached slowly. The usual confidence in his movements was tempered now by hesitation, by awareness. He had sensed it, the change in her, the distance between them. "Evelyn, what is it? You've been distant since Chicago." She held his gaze. "I met with Hamilton Wheeler." The words dropped between them like stone into still water. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't look shocked. "I know," he said. "He called me afterward, quite pleased with himself, actually." "You knew, and didn't say anything." "I was waiting for you to tell me." Julian moved toward the window, his silhouette etched against the glowing Manhattan skyline. "What did he say that's unsettled you so deeply?" She crossed to the model, running her finger along the delicate brickwork she had envisioned into being. "He showed me documents. Proof, he claimed, of payments made to Chicago officials who rejected his proposal but approved yours. The designs were almost identical." She kept her voice measured, professional. "He described a pattern, a way of working that crosses ethical, maybe even legal boundaries." Julian turned back to her, his face unreadable. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe. That's the problem." She looked up the key pendant, catching the light against her collarbone. "What I do know is this. You haven't told me the full story about the foundry, about why you sought me out, about what exactly this project means to you. A long pause followed, a silence thick with everything left unsaid. Finally, Julian gave a slow nod. You're right. He walked to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a thick, weathered folder. Not because of what Wheeler suggested, he said, placing it beside the model, but because the truth deserves clarity. Everything is in here. The full history. The Wheeler claims the transaction records from the 1950s documents that prove the purchase was legal. Yes, I've made contributions to city officials, campaign donations disclosed above board. He left that part out. Evelyn opened the folder. She flipped through the papers, deeds, correspondence, meeting transcripts. It all appeared legitimate. But what stopped her wasn't a contract. It was a yellowed newspaper clipping, a black and white photo. Workers at Hale Foundry gathered outside the gates, celebrating the transfer of ownership to Hale Industries. And there, off to the side, barely noticeable, was a young woman watching, her expression equal parts relief and heartbreak. This woman, Evelyn whispered, pointing to the photo. Who is she? Julian stepped closer, his voice quieter than it had ever been. Elizabeth Carter. Your grandmother. The words struck her like a gust of cold wind. That's impossible. My grandmother never spoke of Chicago, never mentioned this place. She wouldn't have, Julian said gently. Elizabeth was the accountant at Wheeler Textiles, Julian said quietly. She uncovered discrepancies, financial records that didn't add up. Harold Wheeler had been draining his own company from the inside. When she confronted him, he fired her, tried to ruin her name. Evelyn stared down at the photo again, eyes searching for the quiet, resilient woman who had once braided her hair after school and whispered encouragement through every storm. She had never spoken of this, not once. My grandfather believed her. Julian continued. He hired investigators. They confirmed everything. The sale of the foundry wasn't theft, Evelyn. It was justice, the final cost of Wheeler's deceit. He moved closer, his voice steady. After the acquisition, my grandfather offered your grandmother a position at our Boston office. That's where she met your grandfather. And slowly, the puzzle began to assemble itself, explaining so much. Her grandmother's fierce insistence on education, on independence, her uncanny grasp of numbers, her calm strength in the face of absence and loss. Why didn't you tell me all this from the beginning? Evelyn asked. Would you have believed me? His voice wasn't defensive, just honest. Or would you have assumed I was using your family to pull you closer? I needed you to see the work for what it was, to see me without that weight hanging over us. Evelyn turned away, hands resting on the edge of the table where her design stood illuminated in soft light. Her chest rose and fell with a slow, measured breath. And how long have you known? About her 5 years, I found her name while researching the foundry's archives. Later, when I saw your work, the way you rebuilt broken structures with clarity and grace, I recognized the same courage Elizabeth had, the same defiance of systems built to silence women like her. He paused, then added more quietly, I chose you because you're extraordinary, Evelyn, not because of who your grandmother was, but because of who you are. Evelyn looked again at the model her vision brought to life, but now layered with a history that pulsed through her own blood. This isn't just a project anymore, she whispered. No, Julian said. It never was. Wheeler believes you're using me. He'll say anything to sabotage this project, but he's not protecting a legacy. He's trying to bury his family's shame, and what is this place to you? Evelyn asked. Julian was silent for a long moment. Then redemption. Not for my grandfather. He acted with integrity. For me. She turned slowly to face him. What do you mean? A decade ago, I made choices I regret. Deals that benefited shareholders but hurt communities. I chased numbers and lost sight of people. His voice faltered only for a second, but it was enough. The look in his eyes wasn't polished. It was haunted. Hale Foundry is my chance to do something different, to take something once marked by exploitation and turn it into a place that restores, that heals, that gives back more than it takes. Evelyn listened, really listened, and in that moment, she didn't see a tycoon or a strategist. She saw a man trying to change his story. And yet, the question that had never stopped echoing inside her returned. Why me? Why of all the architects you could have chosen? Why me? Julian took a slow step forward, stopping just short of her. Because the moment I saw your work, I knew you were building, not just for beauty, but for balance, for all the order life denied you. You were creating it in space and stone, just like I've been trying to. You're not just an architect, Evelyn. You're a kindred spirit. Julian's voice dropped softer now. People like us, we build beautiful things from what once broke us. His words landed where her walls had always been the thickest. And for a moment, Evelyn didn't know how to breathe. Because it was true. She had turned the fractures of her childhood, the silence of her father's departure, her mother's weary strength into symmetry, into structure, into perfect lines drawn over imperfect memories. That Julian saw that he saw her was terrifying and undeniable. She swallowed, redirecting to safer ground. Wheeler's not letting this go. He'll keep fighting the project. He seems hell-bent on taking you down. Let him try. Julian, replied, his confidence returning. He doesn't have what I have. What's that you... He didn't say it to charm her. He said it like a truth plain steady. Real, your vision, your integrity, and the truth about what happened at Hale Foundry. Evelyn moved to the windows, her gaze falling on the city lights below, a constellation of lives moving forward, unaware that hers had just shifted course. Everything felt different now. The project. Her past. Julian himself exposed but also connected. There's something else, Julian said, coming to stand beside her. Wheeler's been digging into your past, trying to find pressure points. He knows about your father, about your mother. He'll use it if he thinks it will break your trust in me. Anger stirred in her chest, rising like a tide. That part of my life isn't his to use. No, it's not. But he's never been one to respect boundaries, personal or professional. Evelyn turned to face him fully. So that's why you've been so concerned about security. You weren't just protecting the project. Julian met her gaze. No, I wasn't. He didn't elaborate, didn't defend, and strangely, she didn't feel the need to resist it. The protectiveness didn't feel patronizing. It felt genuine, not about control but care. What happens now, she asked. That depends on you. We continue the project if you want to, or I can reassign it, give you space, or we face what's coming. Together, professionally, personally. Only. If that's what you choose. He didn't step closer. He gave her room both literal and emotional. I meant what I said that night. Evelyn, I want to be the first to earn your trust, to know the real you, the woman behind the design, behind the silence, but only if you open that door. The offer wasn't pressure. It was permission, and for Evelyn, it was the one thing she'd never allowed herself, to not stand alone. She looked at him steady, but searching. Wheeler said something that stayed with me. He asked, why now? Why this project? Why is Hale Foundry suddenly personal? Julian hesitated, then nodded almost to himself. It's a fair question. He moved to his desk and returned with a folded document, medical records. He placed it in her hands. Last year, I was diagnosed with a heart condition. Not immediately life-threatening, but enough to make time feel different. Evelyn opened the folder, her eyes tracing the clinical lines, but her heart catching on the weight behind them. It made me rethink everything he said, what I'm building, what I'm leaving behind. Not in terms of wealth, but meaning this wasn't persuasion. It wasn't strategy. This was Julian unmasked, offering the kind of truth that men like him usually kept buried beneath layers of armor and control. You couldn't have known about my connection to Elizabeth when you were first diagnosed, Evelyn said quietly. No, I didn't, he replied. That came later. Call it coincidence, or fate, if you believe in such things. He offered a small smile, but it held weight, the kind that comes from reflection rather than charm. When I learned about it, it felt significant. Like something had aligned without my permission. Like it was meant. Evelyn set the medical report gently on his desk, her fingers brushing the edge of the architectural model they had built together. She instinctively touched the key pendant at her neck, a symbol that now meant more than old metal and heritage. It was connection. It was history. It was hers. This project. It was no longer just a commission. It was a bridge between past and future, between bloodlines and brokenness, between who she had been and who she might still become. To leave it now would be to walk away from a truth that was finally hers to hold, and to walk away from Julian. She looked at him, really looked past the power, past the presence, to the man who had dared to share his brokenness instead of just his ambition, the man who didn't want to own her talent but honor it. I want to continue, she said at last, her voice steady. The project. Relief softened his features. And us. Evelyn inhaled slowly, the weight of the choice pressing against her ribs. That too. Julian moved toward her slowly, as if aware that one misstep could fracture the moment. But she didn't step back. And when he reached for her hand, the contact felt like a circuit, closing, not fire, but warmth, not chaos, but clarity. I meant what I said, he murmured. Let me be the first man you trust with your heart completely. I'm not sure I know how, she whispered, and in that whisper lived every defense she had ever learned. Then we'll figure it out. Together. His hand rose to her cheek, brushing it with quiet reverence. I've spent a lifetime acquiring, conquering, calculating. You're teaching me how to cherish. And when his lips met hers, Evelyn didn't feel herself surrender. She felt herself open. Not a collapse, but a beginning. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a blueprint, a foundation laid between two souls who had forgotten that vulnerability could be strength. When they finally parted, something unspoken but certain passed between them. Julian's face was different now, softened not by success, but by something far rarer. Joy. I should warn you, he said, his voice tender, with something raw and real. I don't love halfway. Once you let me in, Evelyn Carter, I won't leave. Is that a threat or a promise? Her smile mirrored his now quiet, knowing brave. His arms wrapped around her, steady as stone. Wheeler's not finished, he said softly. He'll come after this, after us. Then we'll build something stronger, she replied. Because nothing worth having was ever easy. Evelyn rested her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm beneath skin and bone. The beat of a heart that the medical report had marked as fragile, and yet it carried a strength she now felt wrapped around her life, had never promised her certainty. Only moments like this. Outside, a summer storm swept over the city. Rain tapped against the glass like questions, and lightning stitched itself across the skyline. In her mind, Evelyn saw Hale Foundry waiting, weathered, ready to become something new, born from betrayal, remade through vision, transformed through truth. What are you thinking? Julian asked gently, his fingers threading through her hair. That you were right, Evelyn said softly, looking up into Julian's eyes. You were the first to see past everything I used to protect myself, the first to make me want to risk the silence I've lived inside for so long. His expression turned solemn, steady. I promise you won't regret it. 6 months later. Evelyn stood in the heart of Hale Foundry's central atrium, Above her, a newly installed skylight stretched like a glass cathedral ready to flood the space with light. Her vision, once ink on paper, had become structure and breath. The renovation was ahead of schedule. What had once been a monument to industrial power was now a beacon of community, affordable homes, artist studios, innovation hubs, all nestled within the preserved bones of history. Wheeler hadn't gone quietly. He had launched lawsuits, slandered the project through media outlets, and tried to fracture public trust. But truth had been their compass. They had countered every accusation with documentation, with transparency, with the story of Elizabeth Carter, the woman who stood for truth when no one else would public support, had rallied. Wheeler's final campaign dissolved under the weight of facts he could no longer twist. At last he had been forced to retreat, his vendetta unraveling in the light of legacy. Impressive Julian's voice echoed across the sunlit hall as he approached. He had flown in from Camden Hill that morning after a long week managing financial damage left behind by Wheeler's final attempt to destabilize the company. "You've transformed this place," we have Evelyn corrected, stepping into his embrace. In these past months, something had shifted inside her, a quiet unfolding. A strength she didn't realize had always been waiting behind the walls. Julian had kept every promise. He had become the first man she trusted completely, with her dreams, her fears, her heart. His treatments were going well. There was hope now, not just for survival, but for something more, a life fully embraced. And Evelyn had come to understand that her grandmother's legacy wasn't just resilience or discipline, it was courage. The courage to stand for something true, even when truth costs you safety, even when it asks you to be vulnerable. Wheeler's final appeal was denied this morning. Julian said a quiet note of triumph in his voice. "It's over. Hale Foundry is safe." Evelyn exhaled slowly, relief, gratitude, and joy swirling inside her chest, just in time for the grand opening next month, and Julian added for something else. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "I told you once," he said, "that I wanted to be the first in everything. Let me be the last, too." He opened the box. Inside was an emerald ring set in platinum, the exact shade of green she had worn the night they met. "Marry me. Build something with me that's as enduring and beautiful as the structures you bring into this world." Evelyn stared at the ring, then at him. This man who had challenged every fear she'd ever named, who had turned her solitude into sanctuary, who had shown her that the greatest masterpiece wasn't a building, but a life. A life shared. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice echoed in the great atrium, dancing upward to the glass ceiling above. As Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, sunlight burst through the new skylight, a golden halo of light wrapping around them in a silent blessing. Evelyn looked up at the structure surrounding them, not just reclaimed, but reborn, and within that sacred space they began. The restored Hale Foundry stood not just as a marvel of architecture, but as a testament to transformation, to history acknowledged, but not bound by, to the power of vision shaped through pain, and to the possibility of building something magnificent from complicated foundations, just like love, just like them. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Evelyn and Julian through the echoes of Hale Foundry has stirred something within your own heart. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful creations are born not in ease, but in the quiet courage to face what's broken and to build anyway. That true connection doesn't happen when we're perfect, but when we're brave enough to be seen, when we dare to lower the defenses we spent a lifetime building and let someone in. If this story resonated with you, we've curated a special playlist of equally moving tales. Just click to your left to explore more. And if you found meaning in this tale of architecture and emotional restoration, please consider subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Every day, We bring you stories that celebrate life's beauty, not in spite of its complexity, but because of it. Until next time. Keep building. Keep feeling. And above all, keep believing in the power of stories with warmth. Shining stories.